Dust on the Mountains. Winter came and went without so much as a drizzle. The hillside was brown all summer and the fields were bare. The old plow that was dragged over the hard ground by Bisnu's lean oxen made hardly any impression. Still, Bisnu kept his seeds ready for sowing. A good monsoon, and there would be plenty of maize and rice to see the family through the next winter. Summer went its scorching way, and a few clouds gathered on the southwestern horizon. "The monsoon is coming," announced Bisnu. His sister Pooja was at the small stream washing clothes. "If it doesn't come soon, the stream will dry up," she said. "See, it's only a trickle this year. Remember when there were so many different flowers growing here on the banks of the stream? This year there isn't one." "The winter was dry. It did not even snow," said Bisnu. "I cannot remember another winter when there was no snow," said his mother. "The year your father died, there was so much snow the villagers could not light his funeral pyre for hours. And now there are fires everywhere." She pointed to the next mountain, half hidden by the smoke from a forest fire. At night they sat outside their small house, watching the fire spread. A red line stretched right across the mountain. Thousands of Himalayan trees were perishing in the flames. Oaks, deodars, maples, pines, trees that had taken hundreds of years to grow. And now a fire started carelessly by some woodcutters had been carried up the mountain with the help of dry grass and a strong breeze. There was no one to put it out. It would take days to die down. "If the monsoon arrives tomorrow, the fire will go out," said Bisnu, ever the optimist. He was only 12, but he was the man in the house. He had to see that there was enough food for the family and for the oxen, for the big black dog and the hens. There were clouds the next day, but they brought only a drizzle. "It's just the beginning," said Bisnu as he placed a bucket of muddy water on the steps. "It usually starts with a heavy downpour," said his mother. But there were to be no downpour that year. Clouds gathered on the horizon, but they were white and puffy and soon disappeared. True monsoon clouds would have been dark and heavy with moisture. There were other signs, or lack of them, that warned of a long, dry summer. The birds were silent or simply absent. The Himalayan barbet, who usually heralded the approach of the monsoon with strident calls from the top of a spruce tree, hadn't been seen or heard. And the cicadas, who played a deafening overture in the oaks at the first hint of rain, seemed to be missing altogether. Pooja's apricot tree usually gave them a basket full of fruit every summer. This year, it produced barely a handful of apricots, lacking juice and flavor. The tree looked ready to die, its leaves curled up in despair. Fortunately, there was a store of walnuts and a binful of wheat grain and another of rice stored from the previous year, so they would not be entirely without food. But it looked as though there would be no fresh fruit or vegetables. And there would be nothing to store away for the following winter. Money would be needed to buy supplies in Tehri, some 30 miles distant. And there was no money to be earned in the village. "I will go to Mussoorie and find work," announced Bisnu. "But Mussoorie is a 2-day journey by bus," said his mother. "There is no one there who can help you, and you may not get any work." "In Mussoorie there is plenty of work during the summer. Rich people come up from the plains for their holidays. It is full of hotels and shops and places where they can spend their money. But they won't spend any money on you. There is money to be made there, and if not, I will come home. I can walk back over the Nagtiba mountain. It will take only 2.5 days, and I will save the bus fare." "Don't go, Bai," pleaded Pooja. "There will be no one to prepare your food. You will only get sick." But Bisnu had made up his mind, so he put a few belongings in a cloth shoulder bag, while his mother prized several rupee coins out of a cache in the wall of their living room. Pooja prepared a special breakfast of parathas and eggs scrambled with onions, the hen having laid just one for the occasion. Bisnu put some of the parathas in his bag. Then, waving goodbye to his mother and sister, he set off down the road from the village. After walking for a mile, he reached the highway where there was a hamlet with a bus stop. A number of villagers were waiting patiently for a bus. It was an hour late, but they were used to that. As long as it arrived safely and got them to their destination, they would be content. They were patient people. Although Bisnu wasn't quite so patient, he too had learnt how to wait for late buses and late monsoons. Along the valley and over the mountains went the little bus with its load of frail humans. How tiny we are, thought Bisnu, looking up at the towering peaks and the immensity of sky. Each of us no more than a raindrop, and I wish we had a few raindrops. There are still fires burning to the north, but the road went south, where there were no forests anyway, just bare brown hillsides. Down near the river there were small paddy fields, but unfortunately rivers ran downhill and not uphill, and there was no inexpensive way in which the water could be brought up the steep slopes to the fields that depended on rainfall. Bisnu started out of the bus window at the river running far below. On either bank, huge boulders lay exposed, for the level of the water had fallen considerable during the past few months. "Why are there no trees here?" he asked aloud, and received the attention of a fellow passenger, an old man in the next seat who had been keeping up a relentless dry coughing. Even though it was a warm day, he wore a woolen cap and had an old muffler wrapped about his neck. "There were trees here once," he said, "but the contractors took the deodars for furniture and houses, and the pines were tapped to death for resin, and the oaks were stripped of their leaves to feed the cattle. You can still see a few tree skeletons if you look hard, and the bushes that remained were finished off by the goats." "When did all this happen?" asked Bisnu. "A few years ago, and it's still happening in other areas, although it's forbidden now to cut trees. The only forest that remain are in out-of-the-way places where there are no roads." A fit of coughing came over him, but he had found a good listener and was eager to continue. "The road helps you and me to get about, but it also makes it easier for others to do mischief. Rich men from the cities come here and buy up what they want: land, trees, people." "What takes you to Missouri, uncle?" asked Bisnu politely. He always addressed elderly people as uncle or aunt. "I have a cough that won't go away. Perhaps they can do something for it at the hospital in Missouri. Doctors don't like coming to villages, you know. There's no money to be made in villages. So we must go to the doctors in the towns. I had a brother who could not be cured in Missouri. They told him to go to Delhi. He sold his buffaloes and went to Delhi, but there they told him it was too late to do anything. He died on the way back. I won't go to Delhi. I don't wish to die amongst strangers." "You'll get well, uncle," Bisnu. "Bless you for saying so. And you, what takes you to the big town?" "Looking for work. We need money at home. It is always the same. There are many like you who must go out in search of work. But don't be led astray. Don't let your friends persuade you to go to Bombay to become a film star. It is better to be hungry in your village than to be hungry on the streets of Bombay. I had a nephew who went to Bombay. He got into wrong hands. Keep away from the big cities, boy. Earn your money and go home." "I'll do that, uncle. My mother and sister will expect me to return before the summer season is over." The old man nodded vigorously and began coughing again. Presently, he dozed off. The interior of the bus smelt of tobacco smoke and petrol fumes, and as a result, Bisnu had a headache. He kept his face near the open window to get as much fresh air as possible, but the dust kept getting into his mouth and eyes. Several dusty hours later, the bus got into Missouri, honking its horn furiously at everything in sight. The passengers, looking dazed, got down and went their different ways. The old man trudged off to the hospital. Bisnu had to start looking for a job straight away. He needed a lodging for the night, and he could not afford the cheapest of the hotels. So he went from one shop to another, and to all the little restaurants and eating places, asking for work, anything in exchange for a bed, a meal, and a minimum wage. A boy at one of the sweet shops told him there was a job at the Picture Palace, one of the town's 3 cinemas. The hill station's main road was crowded with people, for the season was just starting. Most of them were tourists who had come up from Delhi and other large towns. The streetlights had come on, and the shops were lighting up when Bisnu presented himself at the Picture Palace. The man who ran the cinema's tea stall had just sacked the previous helper for their general clumsiness. Whenever he engaged new boy, which was fairly often, he started him off with the warning, "I will be keeping a record of all the cups and plates you break, and their cost will be deducted from your salary at the end of the month." As Bisnu's salary had been fixed at 50 rupees a month, he would have to be very careful if he was going to receive any of it. "In my first month," said Chitru, one of the 3 tea stall boys, I broke 6 cups and 5 saucers, and my pay came to 3 rupees. Better be careful. Bisnu's job was to help prepare the tea and samosas, serve these refreshments to the public during intervals in the film, and later wash up the dishes. In addition to his salary, he was allowed to drink as much tea as he wanted or could hold in his stomach. Bisnu went to work immediately, and it was not long before he was well-versed in his duties as the other 2 tea boys, Chitru and Bali. Chitru was an easy-going, lazy boy who always tried to place the brunt of his work on someone else's shoulders. But he was generous and lent Bisnu 5 rupees during the first week. Bali, besides being a tea boy, had the enviable job of being the poster boy. As the cinema was closed during the mornings, Bali would be busy either in pushing the big poster board around Mussoorie or sticking posters on convenient walls. "Posters are very useful," he claimed. "They prevent old walls from falling down." Chitru had relatives in Mussoorie and slept at their house. But both Bisnu and Bali were on their own and had to sleep at the cinema. After the last show, the hall was locked up, so they could not settle down in the expensive seats as they would have liked. They had to sleep in the foyer near the ticket office, where they were often at the mercy of ice Himalayan winds. Bali made things more comfortable by setting his poster board at an angle to the wall, which gave them a little alcove where they could sleep protected from the wind. As they had only 1 blanket each, they placed their blankets together and rolled themselves into a tight, warm ball. During shows, when Bisnu took the tea around, there was nearly always someone who would be rude and offensive. Once, when he split some tea on a college student's shoes, he received a hard kick on the shin. He complained to the tea stall owner, but his employer said, "The customer is always right. You should have got out of the way in time." As he began to get used to this life, Bisnu found himself taking an interest in some of the regular customers. There was, for instance, the large gentleman with the soup strainer mustache who drank his tea from the saucer. As he drank, his lips worked like a suction pump, and the tea, after a brief agitation in the saucer, would disappear in a matter of seconds. Bisnu often wondered if there was something lurking in the forest of that gentleman's upper lip, something that would suddenly sprint out and fall upon him. The boys took great pleasure in exchanging anecdotes about the peculiarities of some of the customers. Bisnu had never seen such bright, painted women before. The girls in his village, including his sister Pooja, were good-looking and often sturdy, but they did not use perfumes or makeup like these more prosperous women from the towns of the plains. Wearing expensive clothes and jewelry, they never gave Bisnu more than a brief, bored glance. Other women were more inclined to notice him, favoring him with kind words and a small tip when he took away the cups and plates. He found he could make a few rupees a month in tips, and when he received his first month's pay, he was able to send most of it home. Chitru accompanied him to the post office and helped him to fill in the money order form. Bisnu had been to the village school, but he wasn't used to forms and official paperwork. Chitru, a town boy, knew all about them, even though he could just read and write. Walking back to the cinema, Chitru said, "We can make more money at the limestone quarries." "All right, let's try it," said Bisnu. "Not now," said Chitru, who enjoyed the busy season in the hill station. "After the season, after the monsoon." But there was still no monsoon to speak of, just an occasional drizzle which did little to clear the air of the dust that blew up from the plains. Bisnu wondered how his mother and sister were faring at home. A wave of homesickness swept over him. The hill station, with all its glitter, was just a pretty gift box with nothing inside. One day in the cinema, Bisnu saw the old man who had been with him on the bus. He greeted him like a long-lost friend. At first, the old man did not recognize the boy, but when Bisnu asked him if he had recovered from his illness, the old man remembered and said, "So you are still in Mussoorie, boy." "That is good. I thought you might have gone down to Delhi to make more money." He added that he was a little better and that he was undergoing a course of treatment at the hospital. Bisnu brought him a cup of tea and refused to take any money for it. It could be included in his own quota of free tea. When the show was over, the old man went his way, and Bisnu did not see him again. In September, the town began to empty. The taps were running dry or giving out just a trickle of muddy water. A thick mist lay over the mountain for days on end, but there was no rain. When the mists cleared, an autumn wind came whispering through the deodars. At the end of the month, the manager of the picture place gave everyone a week's notice, a week's pay, and announced that the cinema would be closing for the winter. Bali said, "I'm going to Delhi to find work. I'll come back next summer." "What about you, Bisnu? Why don't you come with me? It's easier to find work in Delhi." "I'm staying with Chitru," said Bisnu. "We may work at the quarries." "I like the big towns," said Bali. "I like shops and people and lots of noise. I will never go back to my village. There is no money there, no fun." Bali made a bundle of his things and set out for the bus stand. Chitru bought himself a pair of cheap shoes, for the old ones had fallen to pieces. With what was left of his money, he sent another money order home. Then he and Chitru set out for the limestone quarries, an 8-mile walk from Mussoorie. They knew they were nearing the quarries when they saw clouds of limestone dust hanging in the air. The dust hid the next mountain from view. When they did see the mountain, they found the top of it was missing, blasted away by dynamite to enable the quarriers to get at the rick strata of limestone rock below the surface. The skeletons of a few trees remained on the lower slopes. Almost everything else had gone: grass, flowers, shrubs, birds, butterflies, grasshoppers, ladybirds. A rock lizard popped its head out of a crevice to look at the intruders. Then, like some prehistoric survivor, it scuttled back into its underground shelter. "I used to come here when I was small," announced Chitru cheerfully. "Were the quarries here then?" "Oh no, my friends and I, we used to come for the strawberries. They grew all over this mountain, wild strawberries, but very tasty." "Where are they now?" asked Bisnu, looking around at the devastated hillside. "All gone," said Chitru. "Maybe there are some on the next mountain." Even as they approached the quarries, a blast shook the hillside. Chitru pulled Bisnu under an overhanging rock to avoid the shower of stones that pelted down on the road. As the dust enveloped them, Bisnu had a fit of coughing. When the air cleared a little, they saw the limestone dump ahead of them. Chitru, who was older and bigger than Bisnu, was immediately taken on as a laborer. But the quarry foreman took one look at Bisnu and said, "You're too small. You won't be able to break stones or lift those heavy rocks and load them into the trucks. Be off, boy. Find something else to do." He was offered a job in the laborer's canteen, but he'd had enough of making tea and washing dishes. He was about to turn around and walk back to Mussoorie when he felt a heavy hand descend on his shoulder. He looked up to find a gray-bearded, turbaned Sikh looking down at him in some amusement. "I need a cleaner for my truck," he said. "The work is easy, but the hours are long." Bisnu responded immediately to the man's gruff but jovial manner. "What will you pay?" he asked. 15 rupees a day, and you'll get food and bed at the depot." "As long as I don't have to cook the food," said Bisnu. The truck driver laughed. "You might prefer to do so once you've tasted the depot food. Are you coming on my truck? Make up your mind." "I'm your man," said Bisnu. And waving goodbye to Chitru, he followed the Sikh to his truck. A horn blared, shattering the silence of the mountains, and the truck came round the bend in the road. A herd of goats scattered to left and right. The goatherds cursed as a cloud of dust enveloped them, and then the truck had left them behind and was rattling along the bumpy, unmetalled road to the quarries. At the wheel of the truck, stroking his gray mustache with one hand, sat Pritam Singh. It was his own truck. He had never allowed anyone else to drive it. Every day he made 2 trips to the quarries, carrying truckloads of limestone back to the depot at the bottom of the hill. He was paid by the trip, and he was always anxious to get in 2 trips every day. Sitting beside him was Bisnu, his new cleaner. In less than a month, Bisnu had become an experienced hand at looking after trucks, riding in them, and even sleeping in them. He got on well with Pritam, the grizzled 50-year-old Sikh who boasted of his 2 well-off sons, one a farmer in the Punjab, the other a wine merchant in far-off London. He could have gone to live with either of them, but his sturdy independence kept him on the road in his battered old truck. Pritam pressed hard on his horn. Now there was no one on the road, neither beast nor man, but Pritam was fond of the sound of his horn and liked blowing it. He boasted that it was the loudest horn in northern India, although it struck terror into the hearts of all who heard it, for it was louder than the trumpeting of an elephant. It was music to Pritam's ears. Pritam treated Bisnu as an equal and friendly banter had grown between them during their many trips together. "One more year on this bone-breaking road," said Pritam, "and then I'll sell my truck and retire." "But who will buy such a shaky old truck?" said Bisnu. "It will retire before you do." "Now don't be insulting, boy. She's only 20 years old. There are still a few years left in her." And as though to prove it, he blew the horn again. Its strident sound echoed and re-echoed down the mountain gorge. A pair of wildfowl burst from the bushes and fled to more silent regions. Pritam's thoughts went to his dinner. "Haven't had a good meal for days." "Haven't had a good meal for weeks," said Bisnu, although in fact he looked much healthier than when he had worked at the cinema tea stall. "Tonight I'll give you a dinner in a good hotel," Pritam said. He sounded his horn again as though to put a seal on his promise. Then he slowed down, because the road had become narrow and precipitous, and trotting ahead of them was a train of mules. As the horn blared, one mule ran forward, another ran backward. One went uphill, another went downhill. Soon there were mules all over the place. Pritam cursed the mules, and the mule drivers cursed Pritam, but he had soon left them far behind. Along this range, all the hills were bare and dry. Most of the forest had long since disappeared. "Are your hills as bare as these?" asked Pritam. "No, we still have some trees," said Bisnu. "Nobody has started blasting the hills as yet. In front of our house there is a walnut tree which gives us 2 baskets of walnuts every year. And there is an apricot tree. But it was a bad year for fruit. There was no rain, and the stream is too far away." "It will rain soon," said Pritam. "I can smell rain. I coming from the north. The winter will be early." "It will settle the dust." Dust was everywhere. The truck was full of it. The leaves of the shrubs and the few trees were thick with it. Bisnu could feel the dust under his eyelids and in his mouth. And as they approached the quarries, the dust increased. But it was a different kind of dust now. Whiter, stinging the eyes, irritating the nostrils. They had been blasting all morning. "Let's wait here," said Pritam, bringing the truck to a halt. They sat in silence, staring through the windscreen at the scarred cliffs a little distance down the road. There was a sharp crack of explosives, and the hillside blossomed outwards. Earth and rocks hurtled down the mountain. They sat in silence, staring through the windscreen at the scarred cliffs a little distance down the road. There was a sharp crack of explosives, and the hillside blossomed outwards. Earth and rocks hurtled down the mountain. He thought of the trees at home, the walnut, the chestnuts, the pines, and wondered if one day they would suffer the same fate, and whether the mountains would all become a desert like this particular range. No trees, no grass, no water, only the choking dust of mines and quarries. Pritam pressed hard on his horn again to let the people at the site know that he was approaching. He parked outside a small shed where the contractor and the foreman were sipping cup of tea. A short distance away, some laborers, Chitru among them, up into manageable pieces. A pile of stones stood ready for loading, while the rock that had just been blasted lay scattered about the hillside. "Come and have a cup of tea," called out the contractor. "I can't hang about all day," said Pritam. "There's another trip to make, and the days are getting shorter. I don't want to be driving by night." But he sat down on a bench and ordered 2 cups of tea from the stall. The foreman strolled over to the group of laborers and told them to start loading. Bisnu let down the grid at the back of the truck. Then, to keep himself warm, he began helping Chitru and the men with the loading. "Don't expect to be paid for helping," said the contractor, for whom every rupee spent was a rupee off his profits. "Don't worry," said Bisnu. "I don't work for contractors. I work for friends." "That's right," called out Pritam. "Mind what you say to Bisnu. He's no one's servant." The contractor wasn't happy until there was no space left for a single stone. Then Bisnu had his cup of tea, and 3 of the men climbed on the pile of stones in the open truck. "All right, let's go," said Pritam. "I want to finish early today. Bisnu and I are having a big dinner." Bisnu jumped in beside Pritam, banging the door shut. It never closed properly unless it was slammed really hard. But it opened at a touch. "This truck is held together with sticking plaster," joked Pritam. He was in good spirits. He started the engine and blew his horn just as he passed the foreman and the contractor. "They are deaf in one ear from the blasting," said Pritam. "I'll make them deaf in the other ear." The laborers were singing as the truck swung round the sharp bends of the winding road. The door beside Bisnu rattled on its hinges. He was feeling quite dizzy. "Not too fast," he said. "Oh," said Pritam. "And since when did you become nervous about my driving?" "It's just today," said Bisnu uneasily. "It's a feeling, that's all." "You're getting old," said Pritam. "That's your trouble." "I suppose so," said Bisnu. Pritam was feeling young. He drove faster. As they swung round a bend, Bisnu looked out of his window. All he saw was the sky above and the valley below. They were very near the edge, but here it was usually like that on this narrow mountain road. After a few more hairpin bends, the road descended steeply to the valley. Just then, a stray mule ran into the middle of the road. Pritam swung the steering wheel over to the right to avoid the mule. The road turned sharply to the left, and the truck went over the edge. As it tipped over, hanging for a few seconds on the edge of the cliff, the laborers leapt from the back of the truck. It pitched forward, and as it struck a rock outcrop, the loose door burst open. Bisnu was thrown out. The truck hurtled forward, bouncing over the rocks, turning over on its side and rolling over twice before coming to rest against the trunk of scraggy old oak tree. But for the tree, the truck would have plunged several hundred feet down to the bottom of the gorge. The laborers sat on the hillside, stunned and badly shaken. The other man had picked himself up and was running back to the quarry for help. Bisnu had landed in a bed of nettles. He was smarting all over, but he wasn't really hurt. His first impulse was to get up and run back to the road. Then he realized that Pritam was still in the truck. Bisnu skidded down the steep slope, calling out, "Pritam, uncle, are you all right?" There was no answer. When Bisnu saw Pritam's arm and half his body jutting out of the open door of the truck, he feared the worst. It was a strange position, half in and half out. Bisnu was about to turn away and climb back up the hill when he noticed that Pritam had opened a blackened and swollen eye. It looked straight up at Bisnu. "Are you alive?" whispered Bisnu, terrified. "What do you think?" muttered Pritam. He closed his eye again. When the contractor and his men arrived, it took them almost an hour to get Pritam Singh out of the wreckage of the truck, and another hour to get him to the hospital in the next big town. He had broken bones and fractured ribs and a dislocated shoulder. But the doctors said he was repairable, which was more than could be said for the truck. "So, the truck's finished," said Pritam, when Bisnu came to see him after a couple of days. "Now I'll have to go home and live with my son. And what about you, boy? I can get you a job on a friend's truck." "No," said Bisnu. "I'll be going home soon." "And what will you do at home?" "I'll work on my land. It's better to grow things on the land than to blast things out of it." They were silent for some time. "There is something to be said for growing things," said Pritam. "But for that tree, the truck would have finished up at the foot of the mountain, and I wouldn't be here, all bandaged up and talking to you. It was the tree that saved me. Remember that, boy." "I'll remember. And I won't forget the dinner you promised me, either." It snowed during Bisnu's last night at the quarries. He slept near Chitru in a large shed meant for the laborers. The wind blew the snowflakes in at the entrance. It whistled down the deserted mountain pass. In the morning, Bisnu opened his eyes to a world of dazzling whiteness. The snow was piled high against the walls of the shed, and they had some difficulty getting out. Bisnu joined Chitru at the tea stall, drank a glass of hot sweet tea, and ate 2 buns. He said goodbye to Chitru and set out on the long march home. The road would be closed to traffic because of the heavy snow, and he would have to walk all the way. He trudged over the hills all day, stopping only at small villages to take refreshment. By nightfall, he was still 10 miles from home. but he had fallen in with other travelers, and with them he took shelter at an inn. They built a fire and crowded round it, and each man spoke of his home and field, and all were of the opinion that the snow and rain had come just in time to save the winter crops. Someone sang, and another told a ghost story. Feeling at home already, Bisnu fell asleep listening to their tales. In the morning, they parted and went different ways. It was almost noon when Bisnu reached his village. The fields were covered with snow, and the mountain stream was in spate. As he climbed the terraced fields to his house, he heard the sound of barking, and his mother's big black mastiff came bounding towards him over the snow. The dog jumped on him and licked his arms, and then went bounding back to the house to tell the others. Pooja saw him from the courtyard and ran indoors, shouting, "Bisnu has come! My brother has come!" His mother ran out of the house, calling, "Bisnu, Bisnu!" Bisnu came walking through the fields, and he did not hurry. He did not run. He wanted to savor the moment of his return, with his mother and sister smiling, waiting for him in front of the house. There was no need to hurry now. He would be with them for a long time, and the manager of the picture place would have to find someone else for the summer season. It was his home, and these were his fields. Even the snow was his. When the snow melted, he would clear the fields and nourish them and make them rich. He felt very big and very strong as he came striding over the land he loved. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe our channel for more upcoming videos.